They say mountains don't move, but when Karen called 911 on me, I made sure hers came crashing down literally. I wasn't just some guy blocking her path. I owned the very mountain she trespassed on. What happened next left her car buried under an avalanche she never saw coming. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I've always believed that solitude on a mountain is the closest a man can get to pure freedom. My cabin sits at nearly 7,500 feet above sea level, surrounded by towering pine trees and snow-capped peaks that shine like silver under the sun. From my front porch, I can see the entire valley stretched out like a painted canvas, golden fields in the summer, and a blanket of white during the long, harsh winters. Life up here is tough, but it's honest. You split your own firewood, shovel your own driveway, and earn every sunrise you wake to see. That's why I moved here years ago, leaving behind the noise and chaos of the city. For the most part, I lived in peace. The only company I needed was the occasional elk wandering close to my cabin, or the whispering sound of snow falling at night. I'd spend mornings with a cup of coffee on the porch, watching hawks ride the mountain winds, and evenings stoking the wood stove while the flames danced like old friends. Nothing ever disturbed this rhythm until she showed up. Karen, now. I didn't know her name at first. All I saw was a fancy SUV rolling up the old Forest Service road that cut across part of my land. At first, I thought she was just a tourist who'd lost her way, but the way she marched up to me that day told a different story. She had that tight jaw, furrowed brow, and a glare that could sour milk. "Are you the guy blocking the trail?" she demanded, hands on her hips. I blinked, trying to place her words. "Ma'am, this isn't a public trail. This is private property." "My property?" She snorted like I'd told her the sky was green. "I've been using this path for years to reach the ridge. You can't just put a gate there." I glanced back at the steel gate I'd installed a few months ago. It wasn't anything fancy, just a sturdy barrier with a padlock, meant to keep trespassers and off-roaders from damaging my land. The winters here are brutal, and every spring I'd have to deal with ruts, litter, and sometimes even fires left behind by careless strangers. So, I did what any responsible landowner would do. I protected what was mine. "Ma'am," I said firmly, "this road runs through my property. I paid for it. I maintain it. And I'm not required to let anyone use it unless I say so." Her face flushed red like I'd slapped her with a snowball. "We'll see about that," she muttered, storming back to her SUV. I watched her tires kick up a spray of gravel as she sped away. Something told me that this wasn't over. That night, I couldn't shake the tension. The fire crackled in the stove, but my mind kept circling back to that encounter. I'd dealt with stubborn hikers and nosy neighbors before, but something about Karen's tone, it was more than entitled. It was like she thought she owned the whole mountain. The next morning, I went about my chores. I split a few logs, fixed a loose hinge on the barn door, and checked the ridge for avalanche warnings. Winter storms were on their way, and I needed to make sure the upper slopes were stable. But just as I was tightening the last chain on my snowmobile trailer, I saw her SUV again. She rolled down her window with a smug look. "I've called the HOA. They'll deal with you." I almost laughed. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of nowhere. There's no HOA here." "Well, then I'll call 911. You'll be hearing from them soon." She revved her engine and sped off again, leaving me with a cloud of exhaust and a growing sense of unease. The morning after Karen's little outburst, I woke up to the sound of tires crunching on the frozen dirt road outside my cabin. It wasn't unusual for delivery trucks or the occasional hunter to pass through, but when I peeked through my frosted window, I saw her SUV parked right in front of my gate again. She wasn't alone this time. Karen had brought a man with her. He looked like the type who'd rather be anywhere else, bundled up in a fancy down jacket with the hood pulled tight, trying to avoid the biting mountain wind. I slipped on my boots and stepped out onto the porch. "What's this about?" I called out, voice firm but calm. Karen whipped around, pointing at me like she was about to declare war. "This is trespassing on public land," she shouted. "You can't just close off a road people have used for decades. My family and I have hiked this ridge every winter. You don't own nature." I took a slow breath, walking closer so I didn't have to yell over the howling wind. "Karen, this road isn't public. It runs straight through my property line. I have the survey papers, tax documents, and everything to prove it. The man next to her shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should just talk this out. Stay out of it, Karen snapped at him. He thinks he can boss us around just because he built some fancy gate. I kept my cool, but inside, my patience was running thin. The gate isn't there to inconvenience anyone. It's there because I'm tired of cleaning up trash, fixing ruts, and chasing off people who think my land is a playground. I'm not stopping you from enjoying the ridge. You just need to take the public trailhead 2 miles down the valley. That's what it's there for. Karen folded her arms, glaring like I'd insulted her ancestors. 2 miles, I'm not walking 2 extra miles because you decided to play king of the mountain. I'm calling the sheriff. Go ahead, I said, standing tall. You'll only embarrass yourself. She scowled, then pulled out her phone, muttering something about men with too much power as she dialed. The man beside her looked apologetic, but he didn't say a word. I went back to the porch, leaning against the railing while she made her call. She was loud, making sure I could hear every word. Yes, officer. There's some guy blocking public access up here. He's being aggressive. I feel threatened. I rolled my eyes. I hadn't moved an inch from my porch, but already she was painting me as the villain. Within an hour, I heard sirens in the distance. A county sheriff's SUV crawled up the road, lights flashing against the icy trees. I met him halfway, snow crunching under my boots. "Morning, sir," I greeted, tipping my hat. I'm guessing this is about her, the sheriff. A broad-shouldered man with a calm demeanor nodded. "Got a call about a dispute over access. Mind telling me what's going on?" Karen rushed up before I could answer. This man blocked the only road to the ridge. He's threatening hikers. He can't just take the mountain for himself. The sheriff raised a hand. "Ma'am, let him speak." I handed over my property papers, neatly folded and laminated for situations just like this. This road cuts through my land. I built the gate after years of damage and trespassing. There's a public trailhead nearby, but she doesn't want to use it. I have every right to protect my property. The sheriff looked through the documents, then back at Karen. "Ma'am, he's right. This road isn't public. He's not breaking any laws." Karen's face turned crimson. "You're taking his side. You don't understand. My family has been coming here for years. I understand," the sheriff said, his tone patient. "But that doesn't make it yours. You'll need to use the public access points." Karen huffed, stomping back to her SUV. "This isn't over. I know my rights." As the sheriff drove off, I watched her fume in her car. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I saw her pull out her phone again, snapping pictures of my gate like she was gathering evidence for some grand lawsuit. I shook my head and went inside. That evening, I sat by the wood stove, thinking about how something as simple as a gate could stir up so much chaos. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the first battle. Karen wasn't going to stop, and neither was I. 2 days after the sheriff left, I thought maybe the storm had passed. I was wrong. Karen didn't just lick her wounds and move on. She doubled down. Early one frosty morning, while I was splitting firewood near the cabin, I saw her SUV creeping up the road again. She parked right in front of my gate, blocking the path with her headlights glaring like a pair of angry eyes. I leaned on my axe, waiting for the next round of drama. "Morning, Karen," I called out, trying to sound calm but firm. Her door slammed open. "Don't morning me," she barked. "You think you can run me off my mountain? Think again. I've already called 911 this time, and they'll make you take down that gate." I tilted my head, amused but irritated. "You really called 911 over a gate? That's not an emergency?" "Karen, it is when you're blocking public land," she snapped, hands gesturing wildly. "You're threatening me every time I drive up here. Threatening you. I'm standing here with an axe because I'm splitting wood. If that scares you, that's your problem, not mine." Her face turned red, but she pulled out her phone to prove her point. "You'll see when they get here. They'll haul you away, and I'll finally get my road back. I knew better. I dealt with boundary disputes before, and I had every legal document on my side." Still, Karen was relentless. Instead of waiting for her to escalate, I went inside, grabbed my folder with the land survey maps, deed records, and photographs I'd taken over the years. I laid them out on the porch table like a general preparing for battle. By the time the sheriff's SUV arrived, Karen was pacing in front of the gate like a caged animal. She ran over to him as he stepped out, her voice high-pitched and sharp. "There he is. He's blocking me again. You have to make him open this road. He's dangerous." The sheriff, the same one who came before, gave me a knowing look. "Sir, I'm guessing this is the same issue." "Yes, sir," I replied, holding up the paperwork. "She refuses to accept that this road is private property." He sighed, clearly tired of this dance. "Ma'am, I told you last time, this isn't a public access road. I don't know what you expect me to do here." Karen stomped her foot. "You have to do something. He's holding the entire mountain hostage." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, that's not how private property works." While Karen fumed, I spread my documents on the hood of the sheriff's vehicle. Here's the deed, the county tax records, and the surveyor's map showing that this road is well within my property line. I also maintain it myself. No one else has the right to use it unless I say so. The sheriff examined the papers, nodding. "Looks solid to me." He turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, I suggest you start using the public trailhead like everyone else. If you keep calling 911 over this, we're going to start considering it harassment." Karen's jaw dropped, like he'd just betrayed her. "You're taking his side again. It's not about sides, ma'am. It's the law." She muttered something under her breath, stormed back to her SUV, and sped off without another word. But I wasn't relieved. Something told me she wasn't finished. Her pride wouldn't let her quit so easily. That evening, I sat by the fire, going over my options. I wasn't a man who liked confrontation, but I also wasn't about to be bullied off my own land. I thought about building a taller fence or even setting up cameras, but something told me Karen's next move would be bigger. She had that look in her eye, the look of someone who thought the world owed her. Sure enough, just before dusk the next day, I found tire tracks in the fresh snow near my gate. Karen had been back, and this time, she'd left a nasty note stuck to the padlock. The paper was flapping in the cold wind, scrawled with angry handwriting. "This isn't over. You'll regret messing with me." I held the note in my hand for a long while, the firelight from the cabin windows casting long shadows on the snow. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one, but not in the way she expected. I didn't take Karen's note lightly. Threats have no place up here in the mountains, especially when winter is tightening its grip and every small mistake could cost a life. That night, I barely slept. The wind howled around my cabin, rattling the shutters like some warning from the mountain itself. I knew I had to protect not just my property, but also my peace. The next morning, I brewed a strong pot of black coffee, grabbed my notebook, and started planning. My first step was to confirm every inch of my property line, just to remove any shadow of doubt. I'd spent years making this mountain home mine, and I wasn't about to let Karen or anyone twist the facts. I called up an old friend from town, Dale, who was a retired county surveyor. He'd known the land around here better than anyone. When I explained the situation, he chuckled. "Sounds like you've got yourself a classic mountain Karen. Don't worry, I'll bring the markers and measuring gear. We'll pin down every boundary so tight she won't have a leg to stand on." By noon, Dale's old pickup was crawling up my driveway, snow chains clanking on the tires. He stepped out, bundled in a heavy canvas jacket, with a grin under his white beard. "Let's settle this once and for all," he said, grabbing his gear. We spent the entire afternoon trekking the property lines, measuring distances, and checking the old survey pins that marked the corners. Some of the markers were buried under years of snow and debris, but Dale had an eagle eye for spotting them. With each measurement, my confidence grew. Not only was the road entirely on my land, but Karen had actually been driving over a section of forest I'd planted years ago for soil stability. "Look here," Dale said, pointing to a spot where the old path veered off. "She's been cutting across your property, no doubt. If she tries to claim this is public, she's barking up the wrong tree." When we finished, I decided to take things one step further. We installed a few new boundary signs, bright yellow metal plates that read "Private Property, No Trespassing Along the Road." They weren't meant to provoke anyone, but they were clear enough that no one could claim ignorance. Later that evening, I took a walk up to the ridge. The snow crunched under my boots, and the mountains glowed pink and gold under the setting sun. I stood there for a while, looking down at the valley and listening to the distant sound of a creek running beneath the ice. This land wasn't just dirt and trees, it was my sanctuary. But as I headed back, I noticed fresh tire tracks near my gate. Karen had been there again. This time, she hadn't just left a note. She'd scratched my padlock with something sharp, like she'd tried to break it. My jaw tightened. Enough was enough. I grabbed my trail camera from the shed, and mounted it on a nearby pine tree, angled perfectly to catch any vehicle that came close. It had motion sensors and night vision if Karen tried anything again. I'd have her antics recorded in full color. The next morning, I checked the camera, and sure enough, there she was. Her SUV headlights beamed right into the lens as she leaned out her window, shaking her fist at my gate. I even caught her yelling something, though the camera had no audio. She looked furious, like a person who couldn't stand losing control. That night, as the snow began to fall heavily, I sat by the fire, staring into the flames. I knew Karen's obsession with that road wasn't going to end just because I had proof. In fact, I had a bad feeling she'd push things too far and the mountain wouldn't forgive her recklessness. Winter on the mountain is beautiful, but it's also merciless. When the snow piles up faster than the trees can bear, and the slopes become heavy with ice, you start paying attention to every sound, every shift in the wind. One wrong move can bring the whole mountain down on you. A week after Karen's latest stunt, the weather turned brutal. Heavy snowstorms rolled in, dumping nearly 3 feet of fresh powder on the ridges. The avalanche risk climbed to red level warning, something every mountain local knows not to mess with. I spent the next couple of days prepping, making sure my cabin and outbuildings could withstand the weight of the snow. I cleared the roof, shoveled paths, and set up markers along my driveway to keep track of the edges in case of a whiteout. That morning, as I was topping off the firewood stack, I noticed fresh tire tracks again. No surprise who they belonged to. Karen's SUV had crawled up the road during the storm. I checked my trail camera, and there she was, captured in the dead of night, headlights on, trying to inch past my gate as if the snow warnings didn't apply to her. I shook my head. If she kept driving up those mountain switchbacks, she wasn't just risking her car, she was risking her life. Later that afternoon, I drove down into town to pick up supplies and check the avalanche updates from the ranger station. The ranger, a tough woman named Marcy, who'd worked these mountains longer than anyone I knew, gave me a hard look when I told her about Karen. "She's got no business driving up those roads right now," Marcy said, slamming her clipboard on the counter. "The north slope's unstable. One more disturbance and that snowpack will slide like butter off a hot skillet." "Can you talk to her?" I asked. "I've told her to stay off my land, but she doesn't listen to me or the sheriff." Marcy sighed. "I'll put out another public warning, but if she ignores it, there's only so much we can do. Some people don't believe danger until it's staring them in the face." By the time I got back to my cabin, the snow had started again, fine powder falling thick and fast. I could hear distant rumbles from the peaks, the sound of snow shifting under its own weight. I checked my gate, tightened the lock, and made sure the warning signs were visible despite the storm. The next morning, I found Karen's SUV parked just beyond the first bend of the road. She'd ignored every warning and tried to drive higher, but her car must have gotten stuck in the deep snow. It sat there, half buried, with tire marks showing where she'd spun her wheels over and over, trying to force her way forward. I followed the tracks on foot and found Karen pacing near the gate, bundled in a bright red parka, but clearly furious. "Why is this gate locked again?" she shouted, as if I had nothing better to do than wait for her tantrum. "I need to get up to the ridge my family's supposed to visit for the weekend, and you're blocking the only route." I stood my ground, leaning on the shovel I'd been carrying. "Karen, I told you before this is private land, and with this much snow, that ridge is dangerous. You drive up there now, and you're asking for trouble." "The avalanche risk is through the roof," she scoffed, crossing her arms. "You're just trying to scare me. I've been coming up here for years, and nothing's ever happened." I stared at her for a moment, wondering how someone could be so stubborn. Nature doesn't care how many years you've been coming here. All it takes is one bad storm. If that snowpack breaks, you won't be able to outrun it. But she wasn't listening. She stomped back to her SUV, muttering something about calling her brother with a tow truck. That night, I sat by my window, watching the storm hammer the mountain. The wind howled, shaking the trees, and the snow kept falling, layer upon layer. I knew Karen was pushing her luck. The mountain doesn't forgive arrogance. The next morning, the world outside my cabin was pure white. The storm had finally cleared, but the silence it left behind was eerie. I stepped outside with my shovel, the cold air biting at my face, and looked toward the ridge. The slopes were loaded with snow, piled so thick and uneven that even a distant shout could trigger a slide. Then I saw the tracks, Karen's SUV tracks. They weren't just by my gate anymore. They were going up the steep mountain road that cuts across one of the most unstable slopes. I cursed under my breath. What was she thinking the night before? The ranger's warnings had gone out over the radio, and I'd even left a note on my gate that read, "Extreme avalanche danger, do not proceed." But sure enough, Karen had plowed through the side ditch with her SUV and forced her way around. I grabbed my snowmobile, strapped on my gear, and started up the road. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it because I didn't want to see anyone buried alive on my mountain. The climb was slow, the snow so soft that my machine almost sank in places. When I rounded the final curve before the ridge, I spotted her SUV, stuck halfway up the slope. The tires were spinning uselessly, kicking snow everywhere. Karen was outside the vehicle, waving her arms as if that would fix her situation. "What in God's name are you doing?" I shouted over the hum of my snowmobile. She turned, her face red with both cold and anger. "You locked me out again. I had no choice but to go around. My family is supposed to meet me at the Ridge Lodge." "Are you insane?" I barked, pulling my machine to a stop. "You're standing on a loaded slope. One wrong move and all of this," I pointed at the heavy snowpack above us, "comes down on both of us." She crossed her arms. "You're just trying to scare me into leaving." "I'm not stupid." Before I could respond, the sound hit us. A deep, muffled crack echoed across the mountainside. My stomach dropped. I knew that sound all too well. Snow shifting, preparing to slide. "Karen, get in the snowmobile now," I yelled. She froze, looking around in confusion. Then came the low, rolling thunder of the snow starting to give way. I didn't wait for her to argue. I grabbed her by the arm, practically dragging her toward my snowmobile as the first wave of snow started to break free from the slope above. The avalanche roared to life like a freight train, a massive wall of white tearing down the mountain. We barely managed to jump onto the snowmobile before I slammed the throttle and gunned it downhill. The machine jerked, fighting the soft snow, but adrenaline gave me focus. Behind us, the SUV disappeared under the rushing snow like it had never existed. Karen was screaming, clutching my shoulders as we tore down the mountain. The sound of the avalanche was deafening, a mix of cracking ice and roaring snow, and I felt the ground tremble beneath us. I aimed for the side gully, where the trees would give us some cover if the slide caught up. We skidded to a stop in a clearing just as the avalanche rushed past, a tidal wave of snow and ice filling the road where we had been seconds ago. Karen's face was pale as she watched her SUV vanish under 20 feet of snow. "Oh my God," she whispered, trembling. I caught my breath, glaring at her. "You're lucky you're alive. I told you this was dangerous." She didn't argue. For the first time since I met her, Karen looked genuinely shaken. Her arrogance had been buried along with her car. By the time we made it back to my cabin, she was silent. I gave her a hot cup of coffee and a blanket while we waited for the sheriff, who came up later that afternoon after I called in the avalanche. When the sheriff finally pulled up that afternoon, the crunch of his tires on the packed snow was the only sound besides the wind. The avalanche had swallowed the upper road completely. All that was left of Karen's SUV was the tip of her radio antenna, sticking out of the snow like a flag of defeat. "Good Lord," the sheriff muttered as he stepped out of his vehicle, surveying the slope. His eyes traveled from the buried SUV to Karen, who was wrapped in the thick wool blanket I'd given her, still pale from the shock. I heard there were avalanche warnings, but I didn't expect to see a slide this big. Karen didn't miss a beat. She sprang to her feet, pointing at me with shaking hands. "This is all his fault," she yelled, her voice cracking. "He locked the gate and forced me to drive around. He caused this. He's reckless and dangerous." The sheriff, a calm and seasoned man who dealt with mountain disputes before, raised a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. Nobody caused this but the storm and the snowpack. What were you doing on that road during avalanche warnings?" Karen's face twisted, her lips trembling like she couldn't decide whether to cry or argue. I just needed to get to the Ridge Lodge. My family was supposed to meet me there. He blocked the road and I had no choice." I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. "Sheriff, I've told her time and again, this is private land. I left notes on the gate. I even warned her face to face about the avalanche risk. She chose to ignore all of it. She went around my gate in the middle of a storm. This could have been fatal." The sheriff turned back to Karen with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and disbelief. "Ma'am, you're lucky to be alive. If he hadn't gone up there with his snowmobile, we'd be pulling your body out of that snow right now. You need to understand that private property is private, and ignoring avalanche warnings isn't just illegal, it's suicidal." Karen's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. For the first time, I saw a crack in her confidence. The reality of what had happened was sinking in. The sheriff motioned for us to head back to my cabin, where he started filling out his incident report. He photographed everything my gate, the warning signs, and the avalanche site while jotting notes into his book. "This will cover you if she tries to claim damages," he told me. "Your paperwork and the trail camera footage prove that you warned her." I glanced over at Karen, who was sitting quietly near the fire, staring at the floor. Her red parka was still dusted with snow, her hair sticking out in messy strands. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had stormed up to my gate just days ago. "Karen," I said, my tone calmer now, "you could have died today. This mountain doesn't care about how long you've been coming here or what you think is yours. Nature isn't negotiable. I don't want to see anyone hurt, but I can't have people ignoring my warnings either." She raised her eyes to mine, and for once, I didn't see defiance. I saw regret. I didn't think it was that dangerous," she admitted quietly. "I thought you were just trying to keep people out because you were stubborn. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gone around your gate." I let out a slow breath, letting her words sink in. "Apology accepted," I said after a moment, "but you need to understand this land is my responsibility. If something happens here, it's on me. That's why I'm strict about the rules." The sheriff looked at her and added, "You'll need to arrange a professional recovery team to dig out your SUV, assuming it's not totaled, and you'll be covering the cost. The county isn't going to pay for a rescue caused by ignoring warnings." Karen swallowed hard but didn't argue. Her pride had taken a beating, and I think she finally realized this wasn't a game she could win with stubbornness or phone calls. As the sheriff wrapped up his paperwork, he turned to me. "If she gives you any more trouble, let me know. But after this, I think she's learned her lesson." After he left, the cabin fell quiet again, except for the crackle of the wood stove. I sat across from Karen, watching her sip the hot coffee I'd given her. She was no longer glaring or complaining, just lost in her thoughts. "You'll be okay getting down the mountain?" I asked after a while. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I just need to rethink some things. I've been coming here for years, but I guess I never really respected how dangerous it can be, or how much work it takes to keep a place like this safe." I gave her a small nod. "It's not just about gates and fences. It's about respecting the land and the people who care for it." She looked at me for a moment, then said softly, "Thank you for saving me." It wasn't much, but I could tell she meant it. The following morning, the mountain was quiet again, blanketed in a heavy, ice calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sharp chill and a sky so blue it looked painted. Karen had spent the night in town after the sheriff drove her down the mountain, leaving her SUV entombed under a mountain of snow. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief, like the mountain itself had spoken, delivering its own kind of justice. Still, I knew this story wasn't finished. The sheriff had promised to file a formal incident report, and Karen would have to deal with the towing company and the thousands of dollars it would cost to dig her car out if it could even be saved. She'd also face fines for trespassing on private property and ignoring avalanche warnings. That afternoon, I drove my snowmobile up to check the ridge. The slide had carved a path of destruction down the mountainside. Trees were snapped like matchsticks, and the road was buried under a thick slab of ice and compacted snow. Looking at the wreckage, I couldn't help but shake my head. It could have been so much worse. If I hadn't been there, Karen might not have survived. As I stood there, the sheriff's voice echoed in my mind. This man saved your life. I hadn't thought of it that way in the moment, but the truth was, I didn't even hesitate to risk my own neck to get her out of danger. Not because I liked her, far from it, but because that's what you do out here. On the mountain, you look out for people, even when they don't deserve it. A few days later, I was splitting logs by the cabin when I heard tires crunching up the driveway. I turned, half expecting another argument, but instead I saw Karen stepping out of a pickup truck. She wasn't wearing her usual smug look. She had her hands in her coat pockets, her expression soft and almost humble. "I came to apologize," she said, her breath visible in the cold air. I put down my axe and waited, saying nothing. "I was wrong," she continued. "About the road, about the mountain, about you. I let my pride get the better of me, and I could have died because of it. I know I can't undo the mess I made, but I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. Truly." There was a sincerity in her voice I hadn't heard before. Maybe it was the avalanche that had shaken her. Maybe it was the bill she was facing for the SUV recovery. Either way, I could see she wasn't here to pick a fight. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "You scared me, Karen, not because of what you did to me, but because I knew that mountain was going to eat you alive if you kept pushing your luck. Out here, you don't get second chances very often." She nodded, glancing down at her boots. "I understand that now. I should have respected your property and your warnings. I could have rubbed it in, told her how much trouble she caused me, but I didn't. Instead, I said, the mountain taught you that lesson better than I ever could. Just don't forget it." We stood there for a moment in the quiet, and then she added, "The sheriff told me about the footage you had of me trespassing. If you want me to pay for the damages to your gate or the property, just send me the bill. I owe you that much." I gave a small nod. "I'll let you know. But honestly, the best thing you can do is stay safe and use the public trail like everyone else." She offered a faint smile. "Deal." After she left, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the sun sink behind the ridge. The mountain was calm now, as if everything had been set right again. Over the next week, I rebuilt part of the gate and reinforced my boundary signs. People in town started to hear the story how Karen had ignored the warnings, and how the avalanche buried her SUV. Some laughed, some shook their heads, but everyone agreed the mountain doesn't play favorites. By the time spring rolled around, Karen had stopped coming up my road. I heard she'd started hiking the public trail with her family instead, and from what the sheriff told me, she even thanked him for setting her straight. As for me, I got my peace back. Sitting on that porch one evening, with the snow melting into trickling streams and the sky glowing orange, I realized something justice isn't always about the law or a sheriff's badge. Sometimes, justice is simply letting nature do what it does best, remind us how small we really are. When I look back on everything that happened with Karen, I don't just see conflict. I see a lesson carved into the snow-covered mountainside. This place, my home, has a way of humbling anyone who thinks they can bend it to their will. It reminded both of us that no amount of stubbornness or entitlement can outmatch nature's raw power. Karen learned that the hard way, and in a strange way. I think I learned something too. I was reminded that standing your ground isn't about picking fights or proving who's right. It's about protecting what you love, with quiet strength and unshakable resolve. That ridge, those pines, the fresh mountain air at dawn, those things aren't just mine because of a piece of paper. They're mine because I respect them, because I care for them. And after everything that happened, I think Karen finally understands that too. So, if you take one thing away from my story, let it be this: respect the land, respect the people who tend to it, and never underestimate the force of justice, whether it comes from a man or from the mountain itself. If you enjoyed this story or have faced something similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to join our growing community of folks who believe in resilience, fairness, and standing up for what's right.